I'm really very happy to be here, and I'm here this morning to share with you some of my thoughts and some of the thinking that I have gained from other people. And I want you to understand that I'm not standing here as the last word on the problems that black people face. This is just one individual who is trying to contribute to our thinking about the problems and our understanding of the problems that we face. And everybody is quite welcome to disagree with the kinds of things that I might say. And I want you to understand from the beginning, I might say some things that some of you might find disturbing. Some of the things I say are disturbing to me also. But I say them because I believe that they are true. And I believe that we have to look at a number of things that make us uncomfortable sometimes in order to grow and in order to achieve our objectives. And I look at our objectives as the liberation of black people all over this planet, and beyond that, the liberation of all people who are classified as non-white all over this planet.
Dr. Francis Cress Wilsing proposed a controversial theory that the white race harbors a deep-seated fear of genetic annihilation. In her work, particularly the ISIS Papers, The Keys to Colors, published in 1991, Wilsing argues that white supremacy is rooted in a subconscious fear of extinction due to the recessive nature of white skin. She posits that because black skin contains the dominant melanin gene, interracial relationships pose a threat to the survival of the white race, as the offspring of such unions would predominantly have darker skin. This fear, according to Wilsing, drives the social, political, and economic structures that maintain racial inequality and white dominance. She further suggests that many aspects of Western culture, including its symbols and values, are expressions of this anxiety over racial survival.
Now, the things that I'm going to say this morning are within the context of understanding that, number one, that black people were the first people on this planet Earth, the very first people on this planet Earth. We were the very first people to establish family life, the very first people to establish community life and communal living, the very first people to establish science and philosophy. However, that has changed. It has changed since people who are white or people who classify themselves as white many years ago began coming out of Europe and making incursions into Africa and waging war against Africa and African people, destroying and disrupting family life, destroying and disrupting community life, destroying and disrupting black culture. And it's culminated in taking, extracting large numbers of black people from the continent of Africa, ripping everything apart, and bringing large numbers of people to various areas of the world called South America, Central America, America. And I say that we have to, I feel, begin to understand that whole dynamic, that it was much more than movement on the part of a people who were seeking economic profit, as we have been told. I maintain that that has very little to do with what the behavior of white people is really all about. That I say that the dynamic and the patterns of logic and thinking that motivated the behavior of white people stems fundamentally from the fact that white people are the genetic mutation offspring from black people. They are genetic mutations to albinism that thousands and thousands of years ago black people in Africa produced. And people of color are still producing mutations to albinism. But black people produced people who had a genetic deficiency state, and a group of people that were apparently isolated because they had this genetic defect, and if they were not isolated, then the entire people would not have survived on a continent where there was a great deal of sun, and one had to be able to function in the sun to produce survival. And the white people were pushed out of Africa up into Europe. And I say that that's what the biblical story of Adam and Eve is really all about. The first albinos who became ashamed of their nakedness and were forced out of the Garden of Eden being Africa. But the small groups of albinos that were pushed up into Europe eventually banded themselves together and decided that they were going to try to come back and reclaim the land that they had been pushed out of by their parents, perhaps. And beyond that they were going to, out of a sense of weakness and perhaps out of a sense of inferiority, that they were going to try to compensate for that sense of inadequacy and inferiority by not only dominating the land of their parents, but dominating the entire planet. And they have achieved that. And I say that it is absolutely essential for us to understand that dynamic of warfare that is being waged against black people in this area of the world and all over the world, and being waged against all other colored people. And that war dynamic that is being waged against black people and other colored people has to do with the survival of white people as white people. That white people, once they were able to come out of Europe and travel around the globe, they found out that the vast majority of mankind, not only people in Africa and Asia, that is near Europe, but throughout the planet, all of the human beings were people of color. Somebody said that's what human really means, is H-U-E-M-A-N, people of color. And that all people of color have the genetic capacity to genetically annihilate the genetic recessive condition of skin whiteness. And because of that genetic reality, white people understood that if they were going to survive as white, that they had to dominate and develop a mechanism of control of all people of color on the planet, and particularly the men of color, because men initiate the genetic annihilation of white. Women do not initiate the genetic and reproductive act. That men initiate that act. And not only must the men of color be controlled, but the men who are capable of greatest color production and therefore have the greatest genetic capacity to annihilate the white position, and that's black men, that they, of all people, must be destroyed and they must be controlled. And so a mechanism was evolved to achieve primarily and fundamentally the control and domination of black men. And I say that if we begin to understand that families are not just the coming together of a male and a female and reproducing offspring. But a family unit has a basic and fundamental function in terms of the functioning of a society or the functioning of a social system. That family units are units of organization, units of conscious organization for bringing forth young, for the maximal development of young, and for the maximal functioning of the adults within the given environmental context, within the physical environment and with the social environment. And that if white people were going to control black people or people of color, they had to do something about crippling the potential, crippling the development of family life, so that any group of people who are oppressed, any group of people who have had power taken away from them cannot have family life. And that is the dynamic of oppression itself. It does not mean that the people are genetically incapable, that they are intellectually incapable. It means that the dynamics of oppression see to it that that fundamental and necessary unit for behavior organization cannot form. And I think what we have to go back and understand is that the system of white supremacy power domination controls and organizes behavior in all areas of life activity. That's what power means. Power means the ability and the capacity to control the organization in all areas of people activity. That means economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war.
Her work took a pivotal turn when she started to explore the roots of racism through a psychoanalytical lens. Dr. Wilsing argued that racism is not just a social or political issue, but is deeply embedded in the psyche of those who perpetuate it. She became known for her theory of color confrontation, which she first articulated in a 1970 essay published in the Black Scholar Journal. This essay laid the groundwork for her later work. Dr. Wilsing's theories were highly controversial within and outside the academic community. Critics accused her of promoting divisiveness and lacking scientific rigor. However, her supporters hailed her work as a bold and necessary exploration of the psychological dimensions of racism, offering a framework for understanding the persistence of racial inequalities. Despite the controversy, Wilsing's work resonated with many people, particularly within the African American community. Her ideas have been influential in Afrocentric thought and continue to be discussed in academic circles and social movements focused on racial justice. Now, I have a couple key points from this part of the lecture that stood out to me that I want us to ponder on and kind of just think on a bit more. And, we can put your thoughts in the comments and tell me what you think about. But so she started off talking about sharing her thoughts on the understanding of the problem of white supremacy. So this is what led her on her journey to write and publish the ISIS papers. She was looking for answers to the problems of white supremacy. Why do white people behave the way they behave towards black people, right? So she came up with the color confrontation, the theory of the color confrontation that we just learned about, that we just listened to. The theory of genetic annihilation. White people fear genetic annihilation from the majority of the population of the globe who are melanated people, people of hue, people of color, hue man. Now, she also stated that she understands that she has a a radical view, a controversial view, a different view, and she welcomes all disagreements because not only does she want you to think, but she wants to think as well. She welcomes disagreement. She welcomes the challenges, but she believes that she came upon correct information through her study and through her research. Through expressing her theories and her ideas on the theory of color confrontation, she wants us to look at the uncomfortable information, the uncomfortable truths, the uncomfortable data that was collected that goes within the theory of color confrontation. And she wants us to be able to look at this to help us as black people be able to grow towards liberation of black people, and not just liberation of black people in certain spots, to grow towards the liberation of black people across the planet throughout the African diaspora. Challenging the ideas of white supremacy, challenging the thoughts of white supremacy, challenging white supremacy as a whole, but also looking at the roots of what causes white supremacy, what fuels white supremacy, what made white people behave the way that they behave now, right? So she then goes into talking about how black people are the original people of the planet. And because we're the original people of the planet, we establish what family is, we establish what community is, we establish what civilization is, we establish what sciences is, all the aspects of that went to basic human living, basic human learning, basic human understanding, basic human growth, humanity, spirituality, civilization, mathematics, science, reading, all those things, academics, right? Black people are the originators of all these things, but we're also the originators of the white race because of the genetic mutations that she gets into talking about, right? So our original place on this planet, our original positions was changed once the Europeans came out of the caves. The warlike Europeans came out of the caves with all of their insecurities and their thoughts about their albinism and their place on the earth. And when they came out of the caves, they came out in a warlike fashion. And the position of the black man on earth went from being on top to being on bottom. She says they disrupted our ways of living and took everything from us. And when she talks about taking everything from us, she's not just talking about just coming in and smashing and grabbing, taking stuff. She's also talking about enslaving us. So the Europeans came out of the caves with vengeance on their mind and with destruction on their mind and with dominance on their mind. Right? They came out with dominance on their mind. And she said white behavior is about the fear of genetic annihilation because white people, from her theory, from her viewpoint, white people are the descendants of the genetic mutations of black people who were driven into the caves of Europe for survival. Because she later goes into saying that whites went into isolation in Europe to survive, within the caves to survive, because physically, because of the albinism, because of the genetic mutations, they could not physically survive in the physical environments of Africa. It was too hot and it was too sunny. And therefore, they wouldn't have been able to survive generations upon generations because the sun would have been detrimental to them. So once again, she goes in to say that they were the first albinos, and they were also ashamed of their whiteness and their nakedness when compared to blackness. And in comparison to that blackness, they felt inferior, genetically inferior to black people. So that's where that fear of genetic annihilation comes from, the root of it. And so they came back to Africa to take Africa and to establish dominance. If they cannot establish genetic dominance, they will establish physical dominance. And that's why it goes into why they rule the world the way they do. 10% of the world's population rule the world. She wants us to understand that we are at war. Whether you want to be at war or not, we are at war because warfare was waged against us because of the white genetic the fear of white genetic annihilation and whites' need for genetic survival. So in order for them to survive, according to her, in order for them to survive, they need to dominate and control the world's populations of colored people of color, people with more melanin in their skin than them. And the people who have the greatest amount of melanin, of course, are African people. But we'll get to that. But the colored people of the world needed to be dominated and controlled, i.e. white supremacy, the establishment of white supremacy. So therefore, white genetic survival can be maintained. In assessing the dominance of the people of color of the world, you have to understand the role that men play. Men are the protectors. Men are the first line of defense, right? And so with men being the first line of defense, you have to take out the men. So therefore, all men of color within the world have to be dominated. And because black men harbor the greatest amount of melanin within their skin, they have to be dominated, and the domination have to be continuous, and it cannot let up. So each and every way that you can dominate and destroy and just demonize black men and keep them down, keep us oppressed, keep us on bottom. Hey, if you can even convince us to not be men anymore, that would be winning. Because in taking out the men, now you can take out the families. Dr. Wilsing defined the family as a unit with fundamental functions within a society, as a unit or organization to develop their young and adults to their maximum capacity, right? So taking that definition, a family has a fundamental function within a society. This fundamental function within this society, once again, is to develop their young and the adults to their maximum capacity, to achieve their maximum capacity. How do you disrupt that? You disrupt that by disrupting the family unit. If you can take out the men, then you can further disrupt the family unit, what we have now, right? The family needed to be destroyed so that white supremacy could thrive unchallenged. If nobody's challenging white supremacy will continue to grow. It will continue to refine itself. It will continue to get better over time, over the decades, over the centuries, unchallenged. And it won't go anywhere. The dominance will never stop. It will only get better, right? And remember, she's talking about the system of white supremacy controls all aspects of human activity. That's economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics, race, sex, war, and counter-war. So her and Neely Fuller share the same thoughts on that theory, that once again, the system of white supremacy controls all 9 areas of human activity. That is education, economics, entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, and war, right? And so this is the beginning of us talking about Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's theory about, or her answer to the why white supremacy exists and why white people behave the way they behave. White people, according to her, white people who subscribe to white supremacy behave the way they behave because they have an innate fear of genetic annihilation by the darker hued people of the planet. And the group of people who have the greatest ability to annihilate the white race is the black race, because we have the greatest amounts of melanin within our skin. So in order to survive, they must dominate and control not just the black race, but all race of colored people, because through continued intermixing over the decades, over the years, over the centuries, the white race could cease to exist. Remember, we're not just talking about one black man meet one white woman, they have a baby, and bam, you have a Drake. That's not what she's talking about. She's talking about the continued mating of the black and the white. And over time, whites can be bred out. So she believes white people harbor that unconscious fear within their minds. And for some of them, it's conscious. The conscious fear and subconscious fear of genetic survival, because they know that all people of color of the globe can take them out. So this is video 1 of us exploring further Dr. Frances Cress Wilsing and her theory of the color confrontation. And, I love doing these. I love these lectures, and I want to make sure we get these lectures going. I love listening to them, and I hope you love listening to them too. So remember, get in the comment and tell me what you think. Like, comment, subscribe, share, and we'll be back next week with part 2. See you then.